The courtroom fell silent. All eyes were fixed on Judge Robert Daniels, whose face had turned pale as a ghost. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses, staring at the defendant seated in front of him, the man who had just been charged with a gruesome crime. But it wasn't the crime that had caused his reaction, it was the man's face. The man he once called his best friend. Jason Clark. The name hit Judge Daniels like a punch to the gut, forcing him to take a step back. His mind raced, searching for answers, but it was like trying to hold water in his hands. He had known Jason since childhood. They had grown up together in the same small town, played football in the streets, shared secrets and dreams. But now, Jason was sitting there, a defendant in a high-profile murder trial. It was too much to process. Jason, Judge Daniels muttered under his breath, barely audible as his heart pounded in his chest. Jason's cold, empty eyes met the judge's gaze, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The entire courtroom was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The defense attorney's voice cut through the silence, asking for a moment of recess. But the judge didn't respond. He couldn't. What had happened to his friend? What had driven him to this point? And was it really possible that the person sitting there, in that chair, could be the same Jason he had laughed with as a child? The courtroom was on the edge of its seat, and the audience could feel the tension building. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was personal. Jason had been accused of brutally killing a young woman in their town, a crime that had shaken the entire community. But no one had expected the judge to be emotionally compromised by this case, especially not in the way he was right now. The bailiff cleared his throat, but Judge Daniels remained silent. His mind wandered back to a simpler time, to when everything had seemed right. He remembered those late nights spent on the porch, talking about the future with Jason, the endless conversations about life, love, and what it meant to be a man. How could that same person now stand trial for murder? It made no sense. The air was thick with uncertainty as the judge slowly stood up, his chair scraping across the floor. His eyes never left Jason, the man who had been his brother in all but blood. Could he really be the killer? Was there something beneath the surface he hadn't seen all those years? And just as the judge was about to speak, to demand a closer look at the case, something happened. Something that no one could have predicted. Jason stood up too. The room went dead silent. Jason slowly raised his hands in the air, surrendering to his fate. But it wasn't what he did that shocked everyone, it was what he said. "Judge Daniels, you don't recognize me, do you?" The words hit like a freight train. The entire courtroom held its breath, the weight of the moment unbearable. Judge Daniels froze, his mouth dry. Was this some kind of game? A last-ditch attempt at manipulation? But Jason's voice, trembling but sincere, continued. "It's me, Rob. Jason. Your old friend. You can't honestly believe I did this." Judge Daniels took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. His pulse raced. He blinked, unable to process the sudden onslaught of emotion. What did Jason mean? Was it really him? Could it be? Could his best friend be innocent after all? Or was he playing the judge like he had so many years ago in their childhood games? The courtroom was in chaos, murmurs breaking out all around them. But the judge was frozen in place, unable to respond, as if he had been struck by a lightning bolt of disbelief. For the first time in years, Judge Daniels didn't know what to believe. The courtroom descended into chaos as the weight of Jason's words settled in. The bailiff rushed to the judge's side, trying to steady him, but Judge Daniels was beyond their reach. His gaze was fixed on Jason, and his mind refused to believe what he was hearing. Was it really him? Jason Clark, the boy who had been his closest friend, the one he had shared secrets with and laughed with late into the night, now stood before him, a defendant in the most horrific crime the town had ever seen. The judge's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to regain his composure. The room buzzed with whispers, the tension thick in the air. Jason's eyes were pleading, not with fear or guilt, but with something deeper, something that made Judge Daniels' stomach churn. "I know this is hard to believe, Rob," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was enough to make everyone in the courtroom lean in. "I would never do something like this. You know me." Judge Daniels' mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle, but all the memories felt like shattered fragments. The boy he had grown up with, the friend he had trusted, the one who had been with him through thick and thin, was he really capable of murder? For a moment, the judge thought he might faint. His knees felt weak, his head spinning. He turned to his clerk, who stood nearby, frozen in place. "Get me the case file," he muttered, barely able to form the words. The clerk hesitated but quickly rushed to gather the necessary documents. Jason, however, didn't let the silence last long. "I'm not the person they say I am. But you already know that, don't you?" His eyes pierced through the judge, as though trying to force him to remember something buried deep inside. The room was deadly quiet now, as if everyone was holding their breath. Judge Daniels turned away, his back to Jason. He needed time. Time to think. Time to understand. This wasn't just any case. It was personal, deeply personal. The memories of his childhood flooded back, uninvited and relentless. It had been over 20 years since the judge and Jason had last spoken. After high school, life had taken them down different paths. Jason had gone on to study law, while Judge Daniels had pursued his passion for justice, eventually working his way up the ranks. The bond between them had never truly faded, but it had dulled with time. They hadn't spoken in years. Still, there were moments when their shared past felt alive, lingering just beneath the surface. The more he thought about it, the more confusing it became. Jason had always been a bit wild, impulsive, but he was never violent. Never. So how could he be sitting here, accused of something so terrible? The judge closed his eyes and tried to push the memories aside, but they kept coming, unbidden. It was a summer day years ago, when the judge and Jason had made a promise, one they had jokingly sealed with a handshake. "I'm telling you, Rob," Jason had said, "we'll both make something of ourselves. We'll get out of this town, we'll do big things. But no matter what happens, we won't forget where we came from." The judge had laughed. "I don't know about you, Jason, but I'll never forget the people who helped me get here." They'd both had big dreams back then. But where had Jason gone? What had happened to the boy he once knew? Was the man sitting in front of him really the same person? The judge turned back toward the defendant. Jason was still standing, his hands clenched in fists at his sides. There was a desperation in his eyes, a flicker of hope mixed with something darker. Was he truly innocent, or was this just a twisted game? Was Jason playing him like a pawn in a bigger scheme? The tension in the room was unbearable. The judge cleared his throat and slowly made his way back to the bench, his eyes never leaving Jason. "Order in the court." The bailiff's voice cut through the whispers. Everyone fell silent. Judge Daniels took a deep breath and slammed the gavel down with authority, despite the confusion clouding his thoughts. "This court is adjourned for the day. We will reconvene tomorrow morning." As the crowd began to file out, the judge remained seated, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. Jason's words echoed in his mind. "You know me." But did he? The following morning, Judge Daniels stood alone in his office, staring at the case file in front of him. He had stayed up all night, reading through every detail of the case, hoping for something that would make sense of this madness. But there was nothing. The evidence was damning. The witnesses had identified Jason as the person seen near the scene of the crime, and the forensic evidence placed him at the location. It was as if the life he had known had shattered in an instant. And then it hit him. The missing piece. The one thing that didn't make sense. Jason's alibi. The alibi that had never been checked. The one person who could confirm Jason's innocence. His old childhood friend, the person who knew him best. Judge Daniels himself. Had he really overlooked something? The day after the courtroom encounter, Judge Daniels couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his chest. Something was off. As he sat in his office, staring at the case file in front of him, the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit. Jason's face haunted him. His words echoed in his mind. "You know me." Could he really have been wrong? Had he misjudged everything about Jason, his old friend, his brother in spirit? The courtroom had been full of whispers when the judge had adjourned the trial, but it wasn't the audience he was concerned about. It was his own uncertainty. The alibi Jason had mentioned, Judge Daniels, was the one thing no one had dared question, not until now. Could it be that Jason had been telling the truth? Or was this just another manipulation in a masterful game? The judge's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from an old friend, a retired investigator named Tom. The message was short and direct. "We need to talk. It's about Jason. Call me when you get this." Tom had been the one who had originally trained Judge Daniels when he had joined the police force all those years ago. They had kept in touch sporadically over the years, but Tom had retired years ago. If he was reaching out now, it meant something important was happening. Judge Daniels quickly dialed the number, his heart beating faster with every ring. Tom answered on the second ring. "Rob, we don't have much time." Tom's voice was grave, low, and urgent. "Listen carefully. I've been digging into Jason's past, things no one ever bothered to look into before. You've been right to question everything." "Wait a minute, Tom. You've been investigating Jason?" The judge's voice cracked with disbelief. Tom hesitated before speaking again. "I know you think this is personal, and I know you're torn, but there's a lot about Jason's life that's been hidden from you. His connection to the victim, it's not what you think." The judge's head spun. "What do you mean? What aren't they telling us?" "I'll give you a hint. It's not just the crime. It's the way the evidence has been arranged. Someone is framing him, Rob, and they've done it meticulously. You need to look closer. Think about everything you knew about Jason. The way he vanished, the people he got involved with. It's all part of a bigger picture." The line went silent for a moment, and Judge Daniels could feel his pulse quicken. The weight of what Tom was saying pressed heavily on his chest. "Why didn't you come to me earlier?" the judge demanded, frustration and fear rising in his voice. "Because, Rob," Tom replied, his tone sharp, "I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it. But now you've seen the truth for yourself, haven't you?" The truth. Jason had been his best friend, but now he was accused of murder. Could it be? Could Jason really be innocent? Was everything they had shared over the years a lie? "I'll be there," Judge Daniels said, his voice low but resolute. "I'll come see you." 20 minutes later, Judge Daniels found himself standing in front of Tom's modest home. The door opened before he could even knock, and Tom ushered him inside without a word. The retired investigator's house smelled of old leather and dust, the kind of place where memories lingered. Tom led the judge into the living room, where stacks of files covered the coffee table. "Sit down, Rob. You need to see this." The judge glanced at the piles of paper, his heart racing. He sat down, his mind on fire with questions. What had Tom uncovered? Was it something that could clear Jason's name, or condemn him further? Tom handed him a file, thick with documents. As the judge flipped it open, the first thing that caught his eye was an old photograph of Jason, taken years ago at a party they had attended. But there was something off about the image. Jason was standing next to someone, a woman, who looked strangely familiar. "Who is this?" Judge Daniels asked, pointing at the woman. Tom didn't answer immediately. He stood silently, arms crossed, before finally speaking. "That's Rachel Porter, the woman who was murdered." Judge Daniels' stomach dropped. The woman in the picture was the same woman found dead in the alley, the same woman Jason had been accused of killing. "I couldn't believe it when I found this," Tom continued. "But it turns out, Jason and Rachel were close. Very close." The judge stared at the photo, his mind racing. He couldn't understand. Jason had never mentioned Rachel in any of their conversations. He had never once alluded to her in any way. How could this be true? Tom sat down next to him, a somber look on his face. Rachel didn't just disappear, Rob. She was dragged into something dark, something Jason was involved in before everything went wrong. But he wasn't the mastermind. He was just caught up in it. Caught up in what? The judge's voice trembled with disbelief. A criminal syndicate. Money laundering. Drugs. The works. Jason was deep into it, Rob, deeper than you could ever imagine. The words hit like a ton of bricks. Judge Daniels felt his whole world shift beneath him. Jason had been involved in something this dangerous. How had he missed it? "There's more," Tom added. "Rachel found out something she shouldn't have. She was planning to go to the authorities with evidence. That's when she was killed." The room seemed to spin as the weight of the revelation settled in. Jason, the man he had once trusted with his life, had been hiding this from him all along. He had never suspected that Jason was involved in something so dangerous, so dark. But now, the pieces were starting to fit together. Was Jason guilty? Was he the one who had killed Rachel to cover up his tracks, or was he just another pawn in a game he couldn't control? The judge had more questions than answers. But the one thing he knew for certain was this: the truth about Jason Clarke was far from simple. What do you think of the shocking revelation about Jason's past? Can you trust what you know about him? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The more Judge Daniels thought about what Tom had just revealed, the harder it was to breathe. His old friend, Jason, tangled in a web of criminal activity? It seemed impossible. Yet, every new detail felt like another crack in the foundation of everything he had believed. Rachel Porter, murdered because she uncovered something she shouldn't have? And Jason, once his closest friend, a part of it all? It was like someone had taken his memories and twisted them into a nightmare. The drive home from Tom's house felt endless. Each turn, each stoplight seemed to stretch on forever, the weight of the truth pulling him deeper into a sense of unease he couldn't escape. He kept replaying Tom's words in his head. Rachel didn't just disappear. She was killed because she found out too much. And Jason was involved. But was he really involved? Or was he just another pawn? A man caught in a situation beyond his control? The evidence didn't make sense. If Jason had been working with this criminal syndicate, why hadn't he told anyone? Why hadn't he reached out for help? Was he too far gone? That night, Judge Daniels lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind refused to quiet down. The images of Jason, of their childhood together, kept playing in his head. How had he missed the signs? Had Jason been hiding something all along? Or was he a victim in this twisted game, just like Rachel? The phone call from Tom had unsettled him. It wasn't just the revelation of Jason's past. It was the nagging feeling that Tom might be right. There was more going on here than met the eye. Suddenly, the sharp ring of his phone broke the silence. The judge's heart jumped into his throat. He snatched it up, his pulse racing. "Hello." His voice was tight, hoarse from the tension of the day. "Rob, it's me. We need to talk." Tom's voice came through, calm but urgent. "You were right to question everything. I found something else." The judge sat up in bed, wide-eyed. "What is it?" "There's more to Rachel's murder than just Jason," Tom said. "I've been digging into the other members of the syndicate, and I think I found something that ties them directly to your courtroom." "What do you mean?" Judge Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. Rachel wasn't just a victim of a random crime. She was a target because of who she was connected to. "Someone in your courtroom is pulling strings. And I think it's someone you trust." The words hit like a slap. The judge could feel his breath catch in his throat. "Who? Who are you talking about?" Tom paused, his voice steady but filled with tension. "I don't know for sure, but you need to start looking at your colleagues. There's someone close to you, someone involved in this case, who is not what they seem." The blood drained from the judge's face. He'd always trusted the people in his courtroom. They were his colleagues, his peers. Could one of them really be working with this syndicate? Could someone he had known for years be helping orchestrate this entire thing from the inside? He had no answers, only questions. And now, more than ever, the need for answers felt like a weight he couldn't shake. The next day, Judge Daniels arrived at the courthouse early. The halls were eerily quiet, the usual buzz of activity absent. He couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in his gut. Something was wrong. He felt it in the air, in the way people glanced at him as he passed. As he stepped into his office, he found something unexpected waiting for him on his desk, an envelope sealed with no return address. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. He could feel the weight of it, as though it contained more than just paper. He tore it open quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper. The message was short and to the point. "Stop digging. You're getting too close." The judge's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. Who had sent this? Who knew what he was investigating? But more than that, the words on the page were a warning. A clear, unmistakable warning. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what he was up to. They were watching him. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The the judge's mind constantly drifting back to the warning. Every time someone passed his office, every time he overheard a conversation, he wondered if it was a setup. Was someone in the courthouse working against him? Was Jason really guilty, or was he being framed? The question that plagued his mind more than any other was one he couldn't answer. Who could he trust? The trial was drawing near, and the pressure was mounting. The whole town was watching. Everyone wanted answers, and the truth seemed more elusive than ever. By the end of the day, Judge Daniels felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into an abyss. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, he was in too deep. That night, as the judge sat in his office going over the case file, he heard a soft knock on his door. He looked up, startled, and saw a familiar face standing in the doorway. It was his clerk, Laura. "I need to speak with you, Judge," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft, her eyes darting nervously. "Come in, Laura. What's going on?" The judge's heart began to race, but he couldn't quite place why. Laura stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She glanced around the room, as if making sure they were alone. Then, with a hesitant breath, she spoke. "I've been hearing things, Judge. About Jason, about the trial. People are talking. And I think you need to know something." Judge Daniels leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "What is it?" Laura paused, biting her lip before continuing. "I don't know how to say this, but I think someone here in the courthouse is trying to sabotage the trial. They don't want you to uncover the truth. They want you to fail." The judge's heart stopped. He stared at her, unable to comprehend the gravity of her words. Who's behind this?" he demanded. Laura hesitated, then whispered, "I think it's someone you've trusted for years." The room felt smaller as the weight of Laura's words hung heavily in the air. Judge Daniels sat back in his chair, his mind spinning with confusion and disbelief. Someone in the courthouse was sabotaging the trial? Who could it be? And why? The thought of betrayal, especially from someone he had trusted, was unbearable. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. "I don't know who it is, Judge," Laura continued, her voice trembling. "But I've overheard conversations. Strange ones. People are talking in hushed tones, and I'm certain they're trying to steer you away from the truth. They know you're close, Rob. Very close." Judge Daniels stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor as he paced the room. Who could it be? He ran through the faces of everyone he had worked with over the years, his colleagues, his fellow judges, the prosecutors and defense attorneys. Someone had to be behind this. "Who exactly have you heard talking, Laura?" the judge asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously before she spoke again. "I've heard whispers around the courthouse. And there's something strange about one of the defense attorneys, Daniel Harper. He's been acting off. And I don't trust him, Rob. I think he's involved." The name struck the judge like a thunderclap. Daniel Harper had been in the legal world for as long as he had. A skilled, respected defense attorney, one who had been on the opposite side of many high-profile cases. But the judge couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Harper's calm demeanor. Something beneath the surface. "Harper," Judge Daniels muttered to himself. "Why him? What could he possibly gain from this?" Laura lowered her voice further. "I overheard him talking to someone in the hallway yesterday. He mentioned something about Jason being a pawn in a much larger game. And then he said," she paused, her face pale. "He said it was only a matter of time before you would stop asking the right questions." The judge felt a chill run down his spine. Harper knew something. He knew more than he should. "Thanks, Laura," Judge Daniels said, his voice filled with determination. "Go home for the night. I need to think." The next morning, the judge arrived at the courthouse early, his mind whirring with thoughts of Harper. He couldn't just ignore what Laura had told him. If Harper was involved in this, he needed to know why. But how could he find out? How could he be sure? The judge spent the first few hours of the morning quietly observing Harper. The defense attorney was doing his usual rounds, greeting witnesses and talking with his clients. But there was something unsettling in the way he moved, his eyes flickering nervously when he passed the judge, as if expecting to be caught. Judge Daniels followed him from a distance, taking careful notes. Every move Harper made seemed deliberate, cautious. It didn't take long for the judge to realize this wasn't just about Jason. Harper was playing a much bigger game. He watched as Harper met with another attorney in a secluded corner of the courthouse. The conversation was quiet, but the body language was telling. Harper's hands trembled, and the other attorney, a woman, was speaking in hushed tones, her face grave. The judge had seen enough. That afternoon, Judge Daniels called a private meeting with his trusted assistant, Mark, a sharp investigator who had helped him on countless cases in the past. Mark was loyal, someone the judge knew he could rely on. "Mark," the judge began, his voice low, "I need you to find out everything you can about Daniel Harper. His background, his connections. I have a feeling he's involved in something much bigger than just this trial." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You think Harper's behind this?" "Why?" The judge hesitated. "Because I think someone in the courthouse is working against me. And Harper's been acting strange. He's tied to this somehow. We need to find out how." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "I'll get right on it." That night, as Judge Daniels sat in his office, his thoughts turned back to Jason. His childhood friend. Could Jason really be guilty of the murder? Or was he another victim in this dangerous game? The judge's mind was torn between his loyalty to Jason and his growing suspicion about everything else. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was Tom, the retired investigator. "Rob," Tom's voice crackled through the line, "I've got news. The syndicate you're looking into, they're connected to something much bigger. They've been moving money through the courthouse for years." "What? Are you serious?" The judge felt the blood rush to his face. "I'm afraid so. It's bigger than you think. And I'm not talking about just some under-the-table deals. There's a whole operation running here, Rob. The courthouse is the perfect place to launder money. It's clean, it's trusted. And some people on the inside are helping them." The judge felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Who's involved?" "I don't know exactly, but I'm digging. It's dangerous. You need to be careful." The judge slammed the phone down, his mind racing. Who in the courthouse could be behind this? Who could he trust? The next day, the trial resumed, and as Judge Daniels walked into the courtroom, he could feel the weight of the eyes on him. His colleagues, the attorneys, even the jury, they were all watching him. He wasn't just the judge in a murder trial anymore. He was part of something much more dangerous. As the trial began, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone seemed to be on edge, waiting for the next move. But the judge had one goal now: find out who was behind the conspiracy and stop them before it was too late. During a break in the trial, Judge Daniels stepped out of the courtroom, heading toward the judge's chambers. As he walked down the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Every step, every movement felt like it was being calculated. He rounded a corner and almost collided with someone. It was Daniel Harper. "Judge Daniels," Harper said, his voice cool, with just the slightest edge of tension. "I'm sure you're busy, but I wanted to make sure we're still on track for today's hearing." The judge looked at him, his suspicions bubbling to the surface. "Of course, Mr. Harper. I'm sure everything is proceeding as planned." But as he turned to walk away, he caught a glimpse of something in Harper's eyes. It wasn't the confidence of a seasoned attorney. It was fear. Fear that the judge was getting too close. The moment Judge Daniels walked back into the courtroom, he could feel the weight of the eyes upon him. His thoughts were clouded with suspicion, but he pushed them aside as he resumed his role at the bench. The trial wasn't over, and time was running out. He couldn't afford to let his personal feelings get in the way of delivering justice, if he could even still trust himself to do that. Daniel Harper had been acting strange, and the brief moment in the hallway had only made it worse. The defense attorney's cool exterior had cracked for just a second, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. But the judge needed more than just a hunch. He needed evidence, something concrete that would prove once and for all whether Harper was involved in the conspiracy or just an innocent player in a game much bigger than him. The trial resumed, but Judge Daniels couldn't focus. His mind kept returning to that fleeting moment with Harper, those eyes that had betrayed something more than the usual professional arrogance. The fear that had briefly flickered behind them couldn't be ignored. As the court session drew to a close, The judge felt a strange sense of urgency building inside him. He had to find out who was really behind everything before it was too late. Jason, the accused, had been his best friend, but now he was more of a puzzle than ever. Could he really be involved in the murder of Rachel Porter, or was someone framing him for a crime he didn't commit? The judge had to know. The moment the trial adjourned, the judge quickly made his way to his chambers. He needed to call Mark, the investigator who had been digging into Daniel Harper's background. The walls of the courthouse suddenly felt too thin, the weight of every step growing heavier. Just as he reached his office, the phone rang. It was Tom. "Rob, we have a problem," Tom said, his voice frantic. "I found something big. You need to meet me. Now." Judge Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What did you find?" "There's a ledger, Rob. One that ties the courthouse directly to the syndicate. And it's all traced back to Harper. I've been following the money, and it leads straight to his office. He's the one orchestrating everything." The judge's breath caught in his throat. His suspicions were right. It was Harper all along. The defense attorney had been using the trial to cover up his tracks, to divert attention from his criminal activities. "I'm on my way," Judge Daniels said, his voice tense. 10 minutes later, Judge Daniels pulled up to Tom's house, the darkness of the evening pressing in around him. The streets were quiet, too quiet. As he walked up to the door, his senses heightened. He could feel that something was off, like he was walking into the lion's den. Tom opened the door before he even knocked, his face pale and grave. "Come in, Rob. It's worse than we thought." The judge stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. Tom was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of files in front of him. The room smelled of coffee, and the air was thick with tension. Tom pushed one of the files toward him. "This is it. The ledger. It's all here. Every payment, every name. Harper's been laundering money through the courthouse for years. And now he's using Jason as a pawn to keep his operation hidden." Judge Daniels felt his stomach churn as he flipped through the pages. It was all there: amounts, dates, names, and transactions that pointed directly back to Harper. The defense attorney had been using his position in the courtroom to keep his criminal activities concealed. And Jason had been dragged into it, possibly without ever realizing the depth of the situation. "But why Rachel? Why kill her?" the judge asked, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't understand the full picture. What did Rachel have to do with all of this? Tom's face darkened. Rachel got too close. She started digging into the courthouse's financial records. She found out about the money laundering operation, and she was going to go public with it. Harper had no choice. He couldn't risk her exposing him. The pieces were falling into place, but the question remained: what did Harper want from Jason? Why frame him for Rachel's murder? Before the judge could say anything, the doorbell rang. A chill ran down his spine. "Who could that be at this hour?" Tom asked, looking puzzled. "I'm not expecting anyone." The judge's instincts kicked in. "Stay here," he said quickly. "I'll check." He moved toward the door, his mind racing. Was someone onto them? Was Harper trying to stop them from uncovering the truth? The judge opened the door cautiously. To his shock, it wasn't a stranger standing on the doorstep. It was Laura, the clerk. "Laura." The judge's voice was filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" She looked over her shoulder nervously before stepping inside. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Judge, but I couldn't stay away. I've been hearing things. People are talking, and it's not good." "What are you talking about?" The judge closed the door behind her. "There's someone here. Someone in this house, someone who's been watching you," she said in a hushed tone. "I don't know who they are, but they've been following you, waiting for the right moment to make a move." Judge Daniels' heart raced. "What do you mean? Who's following me?" Before she could answer, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house. The judge's pulse skyrocketed as he turned to Tom. "Stay here," he said urgently. But it was too late. Someone was already in the house. And the danger was closer than ever. The loud crash echoed through the house, sending a shockwave of fear through Judge Daniels. His instincts screamed at him to move, but his feet felt frozen to the floor. Laura, standing beside him, looked just as terrified. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. "Stay close," the judge whispered, his voice sharp, though his heart was hammering in his chest. Tom, who had been sitting at the table just moments ago, was already moving toward the back of the house. The judge followed closely behind, his mind racing. Who was in the house? Was it Harper or someone else trying to shut them down? Or was it someone they hadn't even considered? The back of the house was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of a lamp in the hallway. Tom pushed open the door to the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room. Nothing. It was empty. Then, another sound, a faint rustling, like something being dragged across the floor. The judge's hand instinctively reached for the doorframe, his fingers tightening around the wood. His breath hitched in his throat. Suddenly, a figure appeared from the shadows. A man. Tall, dressed in black, wearing a mask. Before the judge could react, the man lunged toward him. Tom was quicker, grabbing a nearby chair and swinging it with all his might, knocking the man off balance. "Run!" Tom shouted, pushing the judge toward the front door. But the judge was frozen. His mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. Who was this man? Was he working for Harper? Was this the person who had been following him? Laura screamed from behind them, and the judge snapped out of his daze. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door, but before they could make it, the masked man recovered, charging at them. The force of his body sent the judge crashing into the wall. "Get down!" Tom shouted as he pulled a heavy object off the counter, using it as a shield. Judge Daniels pushed himself up from the floor, heart racing. This was no random break-in. This was a deliberate attempt to stop them, to silence them before they could expose the truth. The masked man came at them again, but Tom was ready. He swung the object, connecting with the man's chest. The figure stumbled back, dazed for a moment, and Tom took the opportunity to push him toward the door. "Go. Now!" Tom shouted. Without thinking twice, the judge shoved Laura through the door and into the front yard. His heart pounded as he looked back, but Tom was right behind them, slamming the door shut. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. But the judge's thoughts were anything but calm. Who had sent this person? And how had they known they were digging into the truth? "We can't stay here," Tom said, panting, his face flushed with adrenaline. "They'll be back, and they'll be looking for us. We need to get to a safer place." Judge Daniels nodded, his mind still in overdrive. "I don't know who's behind this anymore. But I can't stop now. Not when we're this close." He turned to Laura, who was standing with her arms wrapped around herself. "What's going on, Laura? Who sent him? What's going on in this house?" Laura's face was pale, her eyes darting nervously between the judge and Tom. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. I thought I was just helping you. But now, I don't know who to trust. I didn't expect any of this." The judge's suspicions flickered. Was Laura truly just an innocent bystander, or was she more involved than she was letting on? Tom's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "Look, we don't have time to figure this all out. We need to go. Now." They hurried to Tom's car, the tension in the air suffocating. The judge couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was as if someone had been one step ahead of them all along, orchestrating every move to keep them from the truth. As Tom started the car, the judge glanced out the window. It was a quiet neighborhood, but something didn't feel right. The stillness felt like a trap. His heart raced as he wondered who had sent the masked man into Tom's house, and if they were still out there, watching. The drive was short, but every passing minute felt like an eternity. The judge was replaying everything in his head. Harper's involvement. The ledger. The break-in. Who was pulling the strings? They arrived at a safe house just outside the city limits. It was a nondescript place, hidden away from prying eyes. The moment they entered, the judge felt a strange mix of relief and dread. He had no idea how much longer he could keep this up. The closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous everything became. Tom led them inside, securing the door behind them. "We're safe for now, but we can't stay here long. We need to make a plan." The judge nodded, his mind still racing. "What's the plan, Tom?" "We need to get to the bottom of this. Jason's not the killer. I'm sure of it now. But we need to expose the real criminals behind this. Harper, the syndicate, whoever's running this operation. And we need evidence." The judge turned to look at Laura, whose face had grown even paler. "What's really going on here, Laura? Who are you working for? Who's been following me?" She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could answer, the phone rang. The judge froze. He knew it was coming. He just didn't know who it was. The phone continued to ring, its sound cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. Judge Daniels glanced at it, his heart racing, but before he could reach for the receiver, Laura spoke. "We need to know who's behind this, Rob," she said, her voice quieter now, but filled with an unmistakable urgency. "If you don't stop them, everything's going to unravel. And not just for Jason." Judge Daniels turned to her, his eyes searching her face for any hint of deception. He had never been able to fully trust her since she had shown up unexpectedly at Tom's house. Something was off. What was she hiding? The phone rang again, louder this time. "This is it," he muttered, grabbing the receiver. "Hello." A familiar voice answered on the other end. "It's Harper." Judge Daniels felt a chill rush down his spine. Harper. The man who had orchestrated everything, the man who had nearly brought down his life and career with a single, deadly move. "You've come too far, Judge," Harper said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge of warning. "You've already done enough damage. If you don't stop now, there will be consequences. For you, for Laura, for everyone." The judge's fingers tightened around the phone. He wasn't intimidated. "Not anymore. You're the one who's going to pay, Harper. I know what you've been doing, and I'm going to expose you." There was a moment of silence, and then Harper's voice returned, dripping with venom. "You think you're in control? You've always been a pawn in someone else's game, Judge. Just like Jason. You don't know who you're messing with. And I don't care if you're a judge or a civilian. You're nothing more than a problem that needs to be erased." The line went dead. The room fell into a deafening silence. For a moment, Judge Daniels could hardly breathe. He had known Harper was dangerous, but hearing the man's cold, calculated words made it all too real. He couldn't stop now. He had to finish this. The next few hours were a blur of frantic action. With Tom's help, Judge Daniels managed to get his hands on the final pieces of the evidence. They had the ledger. They had Harper's connections to the syndicate. But now they needed to get it to the authorities without being caught. As the judge prepared to leave the safe house, he turned to Laura. "You know, I never truly understood what you were after. But I think I'm starting to see it now." Laura met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She hadn't said much since the phone call, but now, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "Regret. Fear." It was hard to say. "I wasn't just trying to help you, Rob," she said, her voice low. "I was trying to protect you. There's more at stake than just this trial. There's more at stake than just Jason. The entire courthouse, everything you've worked for, it's all been built on lies." The judge's blood ran cold. Was she working with Harper? Had she been feeding him information all along? Or was this just another attempt to manipulate him? "Don't," the judge said sharply, his tone icy. "If you've been working with him, then I want no part of this." Laura's face twisted in pain. "I never wanted this to happen, Rob. But I was trying to protect you. I was trying to keep you from making a mistake." "What mistake?" the judge asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was trying to stop you from uncovering the truth," she confessed, her eyes downcast. "The truth is more dangerous than you know. People have been watching you, watching us. And I didn't want you to get hurt." The judge's mind reeled. Had he been played all along? Was Laura a pawn in this game too? In the end, it didn't matter. The judge didn't have time to process everything. He had to act. With the final pieces of evidence in hand, he went straight to the police. He couldn't wait any longer. He had no idea how far the corruption ran, but he knew he had to trust the law, even if it meant risking everything. When the truth finally came out, it was explosive. Harper was arrested, and the syndicate was exposed for the web of crime that had been running through the courthouse for years. Jason, the man accused of Rachel's murder, was cleared. He had been nothing more than an innocent bystander, framed to take the fall for crimes he hadn't committed. The real criminals had manipulated everyone in their path, and the judge had been the one to uncover it all. As the dust settled, Judge Daniels found himself standing in front of the courthouse, the weight of everything that had transpired crashing down on him. He had brought justice, but it had come at a price. His world, his understanding of everything he had worked for, had been shattered. He had lost friends, trusted the wrong people, and walked a dangerous line. But in the end, he had done the right thing. He had faced the truth, no matter how painful it was. He turned to leave, but before he could take another step, a voice called out from behind him. "Judge Daniels," a familiar voice said. He turned to see Laura standing there, her face tired, her eyes filled with regret. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. "But I don't think I can live with myself knowing what I've done." The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I can't change what's been done, Laura. But we all have to live with the consequences." As he walked away, the judge knew this wasn't the end. The truth had been exposed, but the cost of that truth was steep. And while he could walk away with a clear conscience, there would always be one question that haunted him: how many more secrets lay buried beneath the surface? But for now, he could finally breathe. Justice had been served. What do you think about this story? Was Laura truly trying to protect the judge, or was she simply part of the bigger plan? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling tales.